Alright, what's poppin'? I've been thinking about making this video for a while, and it's mainly because I love raiding in Destiny 2, and Destiny 2, I truly believe, has the best rating system in any video game. But, yeah, I'm gonna be ranking the best and worst encounter in every raid that's been in Destiny 2. Now, I'm gonna preface, the rankings by explaining real quick on the sort of way I'm going to be ranking these. So for the best encounters, I'm going to be ranking it and kind of judging them based on the difficulty of the encounter. Encounters that are too easy are most likely not going to be the best, and too easy I typically define by not really needing to communicate. So if you join the average LFG team, you're most likely going to be able to get through it without ever talking about the mechanics. And while also being too hard, as most teams not being able to finish said encounter because of how long it takes to understand the mechanic, maybe through trial and error, or just on how many things are going on at one time. Any sort of too easy or too hard encounter is going to be getting negative points. I believe the best encounters are going to be the most balanced, enforcing not only group play, so having more than half the team, I would say, doing mechanics, while the other, you know, maybe 1, 2, or maximum 3 are doing ad clear. And then I also think the encounter should also have a balanced level of difficulty, so not everyone is able to complete it first try, or it definitely requires a moderate level of communication. The worst encounters, as I've stated, are probably going to be the ones that are too easy, or they don't require a lot of communication, and just stuff like that. Also, I'm going to be taking into account the sunset raids, and by sunset I just mean the raids that aren't in the game anymore, and the metas around those times. Obviously, it'd be a little unfair to theorize how Leviathan would go if it was released in current day, where we can fucking weaken, where there's prismatic, where there's, you know, thunder crash, all these different supers that kind of change up how things go. But sorry for that voice crack. But without further ado, let's just get into the order here, and the order is going to be chronological order, so from release. And yeah, to start off, we have Leviathan from Destiny 2. And for those who didn't play Leviathan, it's one of my favorite raids, one of the GOAT raids in my opinion. My pick for the best encounter in Leviathan is the final boss, Callus himself. I think it's a very balanced encounter, and the whole raid really felt like they properly split groups in very clear ways. And I think the Callus encounter, sending 3 people to Ghost Realm, I believe it was random, I could be wrong, again, it's been a very long time since I played them, but them being randomly sent to the Shadow Realm and needing to communicate with Shadow Team, and while also the home team at least having one person listen to the callouts and killing the Scions and, you know, doing all that good stuff to prepare the plates, I thought was a really well done introduction to a final boss in a raid. And then, of course, we all remember the big suck, and if you got it wrong, Callus himself would suck your entire team. And then the damage phase, also everyone needing to communicate, okay, 3, 2, 1, hop on. Everyone hops on, do damage, and then you go into a rotation. I'm also, real quick, I might have forgot to say this, I'm also taking in consideration the solo play experience, so you're getting into a group of a bunch of random people, not you're running the raid every single week as a clan. I think it's a little unfair, because obviously the more complex encounters are going to be really easy if you run it with the same people doing the same roles, where if you run it with random people, you might have 1 or 2 blueberries that don't really know anything at all, and you have to teach them from the ground up how Destiny works. But anyways, going back to the Leviathan discussion. But yeah, I truly believe that the Callus encounter is the best encounter. And the worst encounter is, in my personal opinion, the Baths encounter. And the reason why is because I thought I think they were called Bathers. They were basically just gladiators, but I think even weaker than normal gladiators. Or they were at least like weaker than major gladiators. They weren't too tough. It was like 1 or 2 shotgun shells. And you can most likely get away with using like the Merciless and stuff like that at the time. But overall, I thought it was the easiest one. Damage was a little awkward as well, doing damage to the lanterns. It wasn't a crit spot or anything, so you had to use, I believe at the time it was rockets was the meta. And it was just overall not very thought out, in my opinion. It was an interesting mechanic having people swap the buffs, and, you know, everyone needs to stand on a plate. But I just think overall, it's kind of like the downgrade version of the Gauntlet. I thought the Gauntlet was much, much better than the Baths. The only thing that I think made the Gauntlet weak was the fact that there was no boss, or like a major enemy to kill. But other than that, I thought, like the dogs encounter, for example, had the dogs, obviously, which I would consider harder than the Bathers. And Baths was just the in-between, where it was a less complicated gauntlet, but also the enemies weren't as hard as the dogs, and you didn't have to be careful with anything. And then, yes, it did have that damage phase, but the damage phase was just a little weird shooting the pots, and most people, after about, I'd say the first to 3 tries, most teams at that point, even in LFGs, if you ran it more than 3 times, you're probably one-phasing the pots, and you're just kind of breezing through the encounter. Gauntlet, you can't really breeze through the encounter. And same thing with dogs. There's specific paths you have to take at the very least, and everyone needs to be killing their correct dog, even if you are doing the cheese method. But other than that, yeah, I think Baz was the worst, and I definitely think Callus was the best. You're free to disagree. Should preface that all of these are obviously my opinion, and, you know, like with everything, when it comes to my opinion, if you disagree, you're just wrong and I'm right. You know, we all know this, of course. But moving on to the next raid. I know it's a raid layer, but Eater of Worlds I consider to be a raid. I know it's memed as a strike and all that other shit, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a cool raid. And raid layers were meant to be like the lower version. They were basically meant to be dungeons, I think, without calling them dungeons. They were an interesting concept. So, Eater, my pick for the best encounter would be the boss fight. I thought the boss fight was really cool. Obviously, you were taught to charge the craniums from the previous encounter, so I think that really makes it very simple to understand for the final encounter. And the boss fight itself, while being a giant Hydra, it's very unique, I would say, for Destiny to have a Hydra as like the final strike or raid boss. I don't think any raid has ever had a Hydra that you would need to shoot pieces off in order to... What was it? Was it in order to down the shield you needed to shoot specific parts? I think that's what it was. I could be wrong. It has been a while, but to some extent you did need to have decent communication amongst everyone, and then you would all group up on one plate, and then you would do damage from there. And yeah, overall I thought it was really good. I don't think there was a way to one-phase the encounter. If it was, it would be very rare, and I don't think most teams are like one-phasing the Eater of Worlds boss. So it's not a very cheesable encounter, and I think that's what I enjoy most about it. The fact that you know, you can't just breeze through the encounters like you can do with most bosses nowadays, even in LFG teams. The worst encounter, this is probably the only time I'm gonna include the first section, because it's I believe you do get a reward for doing it. It just takes a long fucking time. And I'm gonna group the jumping puzzle with the section where you get to the end and then you kill ads. I'm grouping those together, and that is my pick for the worst encounter, because it's just shit. It's just, the jumping puzzle, don't get me wrong, is a cool idea, and it was really cool to have in Destiny, but it very quickly becomes fucking annoying when you're running it multiple times. With random people that might not understand it, and, you know, then they fall off and die, and then it's like, okay, now we gotta restart, that sort of thing. But it was a very cool thing to do. I just don't think it was, it's not the best, you know? Eater of Worlds only has 3 encounters anyways, so it's not like there's really hard decisions to make, so I should probably, you know, hurry up and move on to the next one. But I do think the first encounter was just bad. It was just basically a jumping puzzle, and then you kill a bunch of enemies near the end, and then you get a reward. So that's why it's my pick for not being that great, being the worst encounter. But yeah, I think the second encounter was good just because it prepared you for the final encounter, even though it was a little bit short, just needing to open the boss. I also thought it was pretty cool opening the boss to then fight the boss. But yeah, moving on, we have Spire of Stars, the best encounter in Spire of Stars, in my personal opinion. So this might be where we get into hot take territories, is the first encounter. Now, I know Spire of Stars wasn't ran by many people, back in the day, but the first encounter was very unique in that it's not necessarily like a jumping portion. It was more or less the gauntlet, but without the running portion, and that's kind of why it's my pick. I very much enjoy styles of the gauntlet, so you'll probably see a lot of encounters that kind of fit that gauntlet-esque bill, where there's, you know, 4 people on plates, 2 people doing other mechanics, and one team is typically easier than the other, but, you know, you're at the very least needing to communicate with everyone. But yeah. And I think the first encounter is pretty cool. You're passing around the ball, you're making sure there's people ready to pass the ball between certain plates that can't really see line of sight. And then obviously you have the ad clear people, and at the time there's not like major ad clear things, so it did get kind of hectic at times when you had centurions and fucking snipers all the time up your ass. But I thought it was a really cool idea. It was really unique at the time. At the time there was no Destiny encounter, including Destiny 1, that really fit the bill of passing around a ball while needing to stand on plates. And it's one of the only encounters in Destiny history that gave you an emote, so I'm just going to give it a little big ups for being able to give the player an emote. It's a shit emote. It's I believe it's just catch, or I'm open. I think it was I'm open is the emote name. Very interesting idea. And I thought it was a really cool concept. But moving on, we have the worst encounter in Spire of Stars. And my personal opinion for the worst encounter for Spire of Stars is the boss fight. Now, if you have played the boss fight, and mind you, I don't have something like 100 clears in the raid. I've done it, I think, 9 times, maybe less. Somewhere in that range. I've done it in the single digits, let's just say that. Definitely not my most popular clear. I've spent many a times on the boss. And it just either seemed to be very buggy at the time, or it just seemed to be way too complicated for it being a raid lair. It being a raid lair, you're kind of... I think everyone's kind of expecting a much easier experience. I think Spire of Stars, for its time, the boss fight was by far the hardest encounter in the game. Just in competition with Leviathan and Eater of Worlds, I think there's not really, you know, any debate that the Spire of Stars boss was just so complicated. You had people who needed to be on a first set of plates, and then I think you had another 3 people needed to be on a second set of plates. You needed to open a door via, I think someone would get teleported. You would have to see the ships, and you'd have to call out symbols, and then you would have to get a ball. And, you know, meanwhile, there's fucking ads spawning everywhere. There's drop pods spawning that would just one-shot you if you were in the way. There was a lot of things going on in the encounter, and I think it was kind of ahead of its time. It was like, it was the Black Ops 4 Zombies equivalent to what the game should have been considered being Black Ops 2, where everything's a bit more rooted to the ground, a little more simple, but there's just too much going on, I think, for the time. I think now it would release very positively, but I think for the time it was just really shit and really, really difficult to complete for no reason. It also had the exotic emote tied to it, so it did get bonus points for that, but I just think it was a little too complicated, a little too demanding, and yeah. Moving on, we have Last Wish, and my pick for the best encounter for Last Wish. Now, this might be the most controversial raid pick, I'll be honest, but I'm picking Shiro Chi. Yep, I said it. I said it, the second encounter. Yep. It's just the best. What can I say? No, but in serious note, I am picking Shiro Chi. I think Shiro Chi is a great upgrade from the first encounter. First encounter, excluding cheese, is fairly simple. Typically, back in the day, you would communicate people going into doors and, you know, I'm getting this symbol, blah, blah, blah. Now it's more or less chaos. So, you know, everyone just kind of runs around with the chicken, like a chicken with their head cut off, you know? It is what it is, but I do think the second encounter is a direct upgrade in terms of complexity, and I do enjoy the fact that you have to look at a symbol, and then you step on and match the symbol. You have to do that with 4 people. You have to keep track that you're not stepping on the same plate in the same rooms. I think it's a really cool and interesting idea to damage a boss and then run it down and then damage it again. Even if it is 6 times, it might get a little repetitive for some. I personally think it was a cool idea. There hasn't really been a boss in Destiny at this point that kind of mimicked that. I think there was 1 or 2 at the time in certain activities. I don't remember 0 Hour. I don't think 0 Hour was out during this time, but just like certain things that kind of resembled it. But I do think it was fairly unique for its time. And, you know, jumping on the balls, everyone's still having that stupid myth of if you stand in the middle, the balls rotate. When you stand on the ball, it rotates. You can test this for yourself. I tested it a million times. Unless they changed it here and there. I don't know. I don't really keep track, but I just love hearing don't step in the middle. It you know, flips the balls still in 2024, when that's not actually how they work. But, you know, it's just fun in LFG groups also to watch them try to figure it out. It's a harder encounter to teach for newer players. I do think it's just the right amount of difficulty for a second encounter. And I also like the fact that it incorporates the damage. You need to have a damage check, you have to have a mechanic check, and you have to have great communication. Just overall, I think it's a goated encounter. Even if in today's standard it is one of the easier encounters of the raid, I still think it's a goated encounter. Moving on, the worst encounter is let me just see. Oh, right. Morgoth or Margit or Margit, however the fuck you want to say his name, that Elden Ring boss. No, I'm joking. The third encounter, essentially, in Last Wish. Morgoth is just very simple, very easy. You can get away with very little communication. And the damage phase is piss easy. It's one of the easiest damage phases of every encounter if you did everything correctly. And if you still fucked up, you can get it done fairly simple. You know, by having someone die and then 2 strengths everywhere and then the charge goes up. Most people don't even know about the Morgoth part where he charges up. The longer strengths are available. Stuff like that. It does get kind of chaotic when someone dies and people start panicking. Other than that, there's no real struggle in the encounter. I think it's one of the easiest encounters Bungie's ever released. I do think it's nice for the raid to break up the whole, you know, you go from Shiro Chi, one of the more complex encounters, to Morgoth for like a nice break, a nice breather. And then you go into Vault, which is obviously a higher mechanical demanding encounter. with Penumbra and Antumbra. Of course, nowadays it's much easier, but back in the day when you're looking for raid groups and stuff like that, it is very much, it was much harder to find people who actually knew how to read and stuff like that, and there's a lot of versatile ways you can get away at Vault. You know, having only 2 people read, knowing that the rotation is always going to be in whatever direction the room's open in, for each run, basically, for each runner. But yeah, stuff like that makes it a cool encounter, so that's why I don't think you can put Vault in the worst. And I know Riven Cheese is seen by a lot as, you know, one of the easiest boss fights. I personally actually still think that Riven is a damage check, and really what Riven is now is, if you're new to the game and you can't one-phase Riven with your team, you need to look at your arsenal and you need to look up, like, damage guides, essentially. People can make up for the damage loss of your character, but the average LFG team is going to require everyone to do a minimum amount of damage, and if you're not doing that damage, it's almost an insta-kick, find another, and yeah, it's just kind of like the perfect damage check encounter. And then obviously the jumping puzzle for the damage, and then you run down Riven's heart and you kill Riven's heart. I think those are all very cool encounters. I just think Morgoth is very easy, brain dead easy, to be honest, and the only time it's hard is when you make it hard by panicking, and yeah, that's kind of why I think it's the worst encounter. Moving on, we have another raid that's not in the game, Scourge of the Past. Now, if you don't remember this one, I actually think this is one of the GOAT raids. Contender for a GOAT raid. I think this raid was fucking phenomenal. Really sucks that it left so early. But Scourge of the Past, the best encounter in Scourge of the Past. Should also preface, I am also going to be ranking, like, uniqueness of encounter, if you haven't been able to tell already. If it's kind of just 2 encounters merged together, it kind of loses points on the best and worst categories. But Scourge of the Past, best encounter, in my opinion. Actually, I think everyone knows it's the sparrow racing part. Like, let's just be honest, you know? Running from that giant burning ball while racing with the boys and being the last one standing, getting to the end, and just barely making it is one of the best feelings in Destiny, especially for its time. And I think it was a very sick encounter, a very nice addition that we needed to Destiny, where there was sparrow racing. Not a lot of encounters encourage sparrow racing anymore. It kind of sucks, you know? Sparrow racing is kind of a dead idea. But I do think for all those people who like racing on the sparrows, this was the one for you. Your reward was a sparrow, or I should say potential reward, was a sparrow that would outspeed everyone. And I think it still outspeeds everyone. Could be wrong. Maybe they changed it recently. I don't know. I don't really keep up to date with sparrow speeds. But yeah, I think that's the best encounter. And I think the worst encounter is the second last, I don't even remember the name because it's been that long, but the second last encounter where you would have to go underground and you'd have to get the correct shapes, and then you would be let out by the outside team, and then when you got let out, you'd get in a tank, blow up a thing, and then everyone does that, I think, once. That went to the underground, and that would be encounter complete. While it's a good setup for the second encounter, the Drake tanks are kind of wasted, in my opinion, on an encounter like that. It's cool to be able to get into them and use them, but the second encounter where the tank downs the boss is a much cooler piece than getting in a tank and blowing up a few things. If I'm remembering that encounter correctly, I could be remembering it wrong, but I believe you got in a tank and you would blow up a thing. It was either that or you would get on a sparrow and you would bring a thing to another thing. I don't know. It's honestly been too long. It's just forgettable. It's not really a great encounter. It being just the downgrade version of the final. But yeah. I don't think it's a bad encounter by any means, you know. And when I say worst encounter in a raid, it obviously doesn't mean these are terrible encounters. Far from it, because Scourge of the Past, in my opinion, has really good encounters. First encounter being goated, needing to run around into a city and find the correct guy, in my opinion. with a time limit. Really cool idea. Sparrow racing before the boss, and then the boss. Really cool encounters. But yeah, I just think the second to last one, it lacked a sort of uniqueness that I think it needed. And it just has bits and pieces from every other encounter of the raid. So it's just a mashed together encounter. And then, moving on, we have another raid that's no longer in the game. This one's sad because it was only in the game for, I want to say, less than a year. It could have been a year. But yeah, Crown of Sorrow. And now I don't remember much of this raid. I didn't run this raid too much either. But what I will say, in my personal opinion, the best encounter in Crown of Sorrow was Galron, the final boss. I think it's a cool idea. I really enjoy encounters that involve babysitting a boss, because it always keeps you on your toes, needing to not get fucking one-shot by a boss, or, you know, you need to pay attention to where the boss is going, stuff like that. I think Galron also being a clone is a really cool1concept that's not really done before at this point in the game. And yeah, having a babysit team, and then having a team doing, other two teams doing mechanics in their own rooms, eventually opening up every room and then doing boss damage, I thought was a really cool idea. I thought Teraba was also a really good exotic reward. Very unique SMG that I think is underrated as fuck. I think it's a really good exotic SMG. Just really sucks it's exotic, because it's obviously taking up that exotic slot. But I do think the boss is the best encounter. I think the worst encounter, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the first encounter is the encounter where you build the bridge. I thought this encounter was just very forgettable. If I remember correctly, there's shriekers that are shooting at you while the bridge is forming, and you have to stand on plates, I want to say, and that starts the building of the bridge. I don't remember too much of the encounter exactly. I know I could look at a video, but I think it being that forgettable is a testament to it just not being unique enough to remember. And yeah, it's just not really my pick for a great encounter. I don't remember all the encounters too well in Crown of Sorrow, but the first one is definitely the least memorable, in my opinion. But yeah, moving on, we have Garden of Salvation. Best encounter for Garden of Salvation, I truly think it's the first encounter. And I think this because the first encounter, like I mentioned with my previous raid encounters, I do really much enjoy babysitting a boss, and I think the first encounter is a really good setup for eventually needing to babysit in the third encounter. But the first encounter also has the volatile, where you have to babysit and make sure you pick up the vomit that the harpy spits out. And meanwhile, while you're doing that, the other team is running through and trying to complete the connect the dots portion to open the door. And when they do that, it's basically like a leapfrog, where the other team swaps and does what the first team just did, and vice versa. And you do that all the way to the end, and then you get a little bit of leeway at the end, where it's okay if you die by sacrificing yourself so the team doesn't get wiped, because your whole team is behind you, and you're, you know, the only one at the front with vomit already picked up, and you see vomit about to explode, you pick it up, save your entire team. You know, you're the unsung hero of the raid team. So, yeah, I think it's a really cool idea. I think it's a really cool concept. And I think it sets up every encounter moving forward pretty much perfectly. I guess aside from the second encounter, needing to get the buffs and everything like that. But sets up part of the third encounter perfectly, and it sets up a really nice idea in the fourth encounter. The worst encounter, in my opinion, for Garden of Salvation. Now, this might not surprise many people, but if you're a Garden of Salvation lover, I'm sorry to say, the final boss of Garden of Salvation, I like this raid too, don't get me wrong, the final boss is the worst encounter, and I don't even think it's close. And the reason why I don't think it's close is because the final boss just has a lot more shit going on, and a lot more RNG related things. Now, obviously, I'm not referring to, I think it's really cool shooting parts of the boss off, portal spawns, team goes in, does a thing, comes back, great. But moats, being tied to, I believe it's like internet speed or something, and that's why sometimes when you pick up a moat, or you'll be standing on a moat, it doesn't pick up properly. Little clunky, little, you know. I think it would have just, I think the moats idea would have been just easier if you killed an enemy and you got stacks from that enemy, rather than it being tied to moats. I just think the moats part kind of ruins it. Obviously, moats can fall off the edge. That kind of ruins it. You could probably argue there's a skill gap in that sort of area. But I think it being RNG related, how many moats you get, you know? When you spawn in, I think it's, if you get harpies, you get less than if you got hobgoblins, or it's the other way. It's just too many RNG things that I just don't think is very good. Very easy to fuck up. If someone dies or someone didn't make the portal, then you have to send another team in, which then causes another platform to get gone because you have to send another person in, or at the very least you have to send them out again. It's a lot of, like, if you make one mistake, you're punished by needing to do a bunch of other shit. And of course, I think if you make a mistake in a raid, you should have to be punished in some sort of way. But I also just think that it's not, I think it's just too much punishment for just making a silly mistake is, oh, I couldn't make it to the portal, you know? And there's also, like, the glitchy things where portal goes away, and if you touch where the portal was, you can sometimes get sent in. You can't really use AoE stuff that well. Stuff like Scourge and Ignitions can sometimes proc the boss, so it makes it a little less fun in that regard, restricting your loadout. And then you have Cyclopses that one-shot you, you have, you know, if you fuck up and you go in a third time on one side, there's a champion that spawns. Not a lot of people know that. It might only be for the red side. I don't remember if the left side has a champion, but I know the right side does. But yeah, it just kind of sucks. You know, there's a lot going on. It's very easy to fuck up. Damage phase, it's a lot of cool ideas, but I think in practice, it's just kind of a shit encounter, where a lot of the extra stuff no one's really paying attention to, you know, in terms of the extending damage phase. I've been in a lot of LFG groups. I would say 75 to 85% of LFG groups aren't extending damage phase. Maybe your experience is different. Maybe your experience is that the boss is the best encounter ever made. I don't know. But from my personal standpoint, I've done the boss quite a number of times, and I personally just think it's the worst. And I do like the raid. I very much enjoy the raid. I just think it's the worst encounter. Moving on, we have Deep Stone Crypt. Now, this is a hot take. I think Deep Stone Crypt is overrated as fuck. I think it's actually one of the worst raids in Destiny 2, and that's including raid layers. Now, it's not the worst, don't get me wrong, but I actually think it's one of the lower tiers in terms of quality. I just think everything is very, very easy, and everything is dependent on 3 people. And that's kind of the story of the whole raid. But, just getting into the raid, you know, enough of that ranting. The best raid, in my opinion, for Deep Stone Crypt is Atrax. Yep, I said it. Atrax is the best encounter. And I don't care if you cheese it or not, I still think it's the best encounter. I think it has a lot of optional things that really test your communication in terms of shooting the bomb off teammates' heads. You can obviously run ricochet rounds for the OGs who know, and get it off yourself and balance it that way. Very decent skill expression in terms of the mechanic there. If you're doing it the legit way, you obviously have to send the scanner down, you have to make sure all the servitors are down, you have to communicate that all the servitors are being killed, you have to communicate with the team where the buffs are, and while this might not be the most, you know, like, this is nowhere near as demanding in terms of mechanics as something like Gauntlet from Leviathan, or even most of the encounters in Garden of Salvation, but I do think it's the hardest encounter. And if the second encounter is the hardest encounter, I think there's a problem with the raid, personally, and that's kind of why I rate the raid so lowly. But I think this second encounter is the best encounter, and even if you are doing cheese, it's a really good damage check for cheesers. It's a really good, you know, 3, 2, 1, then damage check as well. Nice little communication, making sure you're listening to the raid leader. And then obviously Scanner has a lot of responsibility, finding the correct guy, killing the correct guy, making the correct call out, and making sure everyone's around at the same time. So a lot of different skill gaps are required when using the buff and everything like that. But yeah, I think it's the most skill required encounter in the raid. First encounter was close. I almost put the first encounter as the best encounter because I thought it was a really good introduction with Scanner and Operator. But I personally like the idea of Atrax. I like the idea of clones, you know, finding the correct one. I like the idea of stakes if you shoot the wrong one to wipe. And for most LFG groups, I think this is the true test. If you can't get past Atrax, you're just not getting the raid done. And yeah. The worst encounter is the third encounter. I believe, I don't even, it's called like Reactor Core or something. I don't even fucking remember what this encounter is called. I think this encounter sucks. Reason why it sucks is because it is, in my opinion, the easiest raid encounter at this time. So during Deep Stone Crypt's launch, I think it's the easiest raid encounter ever. You don't ever have to communicate anything with the team. If anyone has done the raid once and they've done this encounter 1 to 2 times, very simple to understand. Oh, I know how Operator works. I find Operator buff. Oh, I didn't get Operator buff? Well, looks like I clear ads. You know, very little communication, if any, needs to be made. You know, hey, I have Suppressor. Oh, Suppressor's on me. The blue buff is on me. You know, shit like that. And then once everyone gets their buffs, very easy to be like, you know, oh, I got suppressed, and then you put it in the terminal, and somebody else picks it up. Very easy, very simple. As long as your whole team didn't do ad clear their first time in the raid, this encounter is like piss easy. It's literally the easiest encounter. You know, even easier than baths, in my opinion. But even in today's standards, it's by far the easiest. No, we'll get to the easiest. But I do think it is one of the easiest by far. So that's why I think it's just the worst. I think raid encounters should be raid encounters, not let's not say a single word and just get this encounter done. Obviously, that's different if everyone's done it before and they know how to communicate without communicating. You know, for all the OGs that remember, you know, use sit to call out lower, or, you know, use dance to call out higher when you were in the gauntlet. Those OG days back in the day. But yeah, I just think it's the worst encounter. I think Taniks was very close to being the best encounter as well. I just think Taniks is more than often cheesed and not required to do the original sort of, you know, use scanner, use everything. One of the buffs is literally 33% of the mechanics are literally gone in the cheese way of doing it. So it's not really a great encounter. I don't think most encounters that have the ability to just cheese it or not really pay attention to a, you know, 33% of the mechanics are really worth having, you know, in a raid, in my opinion. I just think that you lose a lot of points having it like that. But those are my picks for Deep Stone Crypt. You know, again, I'm just gonna preface, feel free to disagree in the comments. Maybe comment down your favorite encounter in all of Bungie's raids and your least favorite encounter in all of Bungie raids. Let's get that going in the comment section. You know, let's get some debates going over here, you know? Or you think all my opinions are absolute dog shit and you just want to shit on me? Feel free to be wrong, you know? Anyways, moving on. We have Vault of Glass. It's crazy to think Vault of Glass actually came out after Deep Stone. Maybe I'm just an old man. Now, what I will say with these remade raids, or remastered, however you want to call them, I personally consider them remakes because they're slightly different. I also am going to be giving bonus points for the encounters being more complex and demanding than they were in the first game, because obviously the first game is a different territory, being everything is like brain dead easy in terms of like encounters. Most of it is just stand here, do this, damage, and then it's rinse and repeat, and then, you know, somebody gets torn. You know, that's like the extent to Destiny 1 raid mechanics. But I personally believe the best encounter in Vault of Glass is the third encounter, Oracles. Now, I know what you might be saying, you know, but Atheon's a much harder rendition. You know, it's a great damage check. And I understand that point. But the second last encounter is a great, I think it's called Gatekeepers. It's a great encounter for new players to learn, you know, because everyone has to be doing something, and this is the mic check encounter where everyone pretty much needs a mic and needs to be communicating, you know. But Templar is able to be one phase, and it's not even a cheese because it just requires the Templar or the Relic Runner to be doing his job, you know. And I understand these points, you know, and I really do. And I understand that you technically can cheese the encounter by having one person do oracles, and I think it's obvious the intention is that more than one person is doing oracles. But this is probably one of the only encounters that I'm considering that to be a skill issue. So for the people, even in LFG groups like myself, you know, not to toot my own horn, but for those people who do solo oracles in the third encounter, you guys are Giga Chads. I have nothing but respect for you guys, and I think this encounter is a perfect upgrade from the first rendition, and I think it is a great, fantastic encounter to be walled at, where this is where you realize in Destiny you need communication. If Vault of Glass is the first raid you run, you most likely won't need communication up until the oracles, right? And this is mainly because if you aren't paying attention to audio cues, which is very, very rare in modern Destiny, to need to listen to audio cues, you know, obviously I'm implying the audio cue an oracle leaves. Yes, you can watch the order, but most people are like, you have to hear where it is, and then you look in that direction, and then it's there. Not a lot of people are standing back and watching all of them spawn, you know what I mean? So you have to be paying attention, you know, ding, 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 okay, I'm number 3, you know, or whatever. Yeah. And it goes up to 7, meaning that worst case, you're having 6 people do oracles, and 1 person is watching 2. But I also love the fact that you can mix and match, you know? If the person watching 2 wants to watch 2 in the middle, or they want to watch 3 in the middle, and have 1 person ad clear in the middle, you know, shit like that. I love how versatile this encounter is, and how, communication really, really matters, you know? And even if you aren't having everyone do everything, and I obviously mentioned the fact that I give bonus points for more people doing the encounter, and only 1 person is doing the mechanics, this is like this is one of the biggest like skill checks, in my opinion, of the average player. If the average player, like if you just play Destiny casually and you solo oracles, you are the creme of the crop. Alright? You're the top dog in that team, and you feel like the top dog in that team once you finish that encounter. But, you know, unless you do it a million times, then, you know, oh, cool, bro, you did it again, congrats. Anyways, yeah, I just think it's the best encounter. I think it's cool. I think it sets up, obviously, the classic, iconic oracles in the raid that you'll need to be paying attention to in the next couple encounters. So, for that reason, I think it's the best encounter, iconic, memorable, you know, perfect encounter in my opinion. And moving on, for the worst encounter, I'm giving it the second encounter. I don't remember what this encounter is called because it's piss brain dead easy. This could also be contender for easiest encounter in all of raiding history. You literally, all you have to do is run Overload and make sure you kill a Wyvern, and that is it. That's all you have to do. Now, of course, you split into teams. It is literally as turn your brain off, brain dead, as kill this. Just make sure this thing doesn't touch that thing. That's it. And you just do that by killing the thing, which you're going to do anyways because they're enemies, you know? The only danger in this encounter is pretty much you mindlessly killing a fanatic and then walking into the pool and then dying because you forgot you actually need to get cleansed, because very little people ever run into the pool. anymore. At least from my experience. Maybe you've done Vault of Glass 100 times, and out of those 99 times, you've had wipes because people walk into the Fnatic pool. But for me personally, I think this is just a brain dead encounter. Hardly even considered an encounter unless you add the respawn token, in my opinion. That's kind of my standpoint. And I'm not including... I might have referred to Oracles as the third encounter. It might technically be the second encounter. I consider the opening part to be a first encounter on normal standpoints, but I think most people don't consider it to be a encounter. I think most people just consider it to be like the opening section. And if you're not considering it the opening section, I definitely think this first encounter where you're defending the plate from a Wyvern takes the cake for one of the easiest encounters in Destiny history. And that's why I just think it's the worst. And yeah, moving on, we have Vow of the Disciple. Now, Vow is one of my favorite raids. Very good contender for favorite raid. I think it is the upgrade to Last Wish. I just only wish it had one more encounter. The best encounter, in my personal opinion, for Vow of the Disciple, and I don't think it's a surprise, I think it's Rolk. I do believe it's Rolk. Caretaker's close, don't get me wrong, but I think Rolk is such a perfect... Rolk is one of the first bosses in Destiny that I ever felt like I was playing a different game. Just in terms of the way the boss encountered. It's very like... I don't want to say... There is a lot of RNG with getting the correct symbols and, you know, stuff like that. But you always need to be communicating with, at bare minimum, 3 people during the boss, maybe 2. But I think it's a really interesting encounter to, you know, deal with a boss actively running you down and, you know, smacking your ass around and fucking causing those beams that once you get 10 stacks, you die. I think it was a really cool concept. I think it's a really cool boss. Makes you kind of feel like the boss belongs in a different game. In a good way, not in like, it doesn't belong. You don't belong here, you know? Go back to fucking Risk of Rain 2, you know what I mean? But in a good way in terms of like, this is a flavor that I haven't tasted in a long fucking time. And I'm so glad I was able to get the taste for that flavor, you know? Moving on, we have the worst encounter. And I personally don't think it's very much up for debate. I think Exhibition sucks. I think it's a terrible encounter. And I think other than Exhibition, if Vow had one extra encounter and Exhibition was better, I think this raid would have been the best raid of all time. But Exhibition just sucks. I don't like the idea. I think it's a cool idea needing to use all the relics, and having, you know, communication. But in my opinion, it is just a slightly harder version of the third encounter from Stone Crypt, where you can pretty much get by doing chaos, and if you ran the raid probably more than 3 times and you understand how the relics work, or, you know, you've done any activity with those relics in the past, and it's very simple how they work. They're not like complicated things to understand. Other than, I guess, the guy who cleanses people. But even then, you don't even need to cleanse, because if you're fast enough, you can just kill the guy at the end. So, it's just a lot of mechanics that just get ignored, and a lot of, you know, just add clear, move on, just add clear, move on. And I'm not really a fan of it. It feels like a worse Shiro-Chi, and it feels like a harder third encounter from Stone Crypt. I just don't think it's that great. Personal opinion, maybe it's a hot take, maybe you really enjoy Exhibition. I just don't think it's mechanically sound, and I just think it's ignored most of the time. If you don't know what Exhibition is, it's the third encounter. It's after Caretaker. But yeah, those are my picks. I do think Caretaker is a really good contender for the encounter, and the reason why I'm not putting the first encounter as the worst encounter, honestly, if the first section where you have to bring the payload counted as an encounter, where you got a reward at the end, I'd put that as the worst encounter because of just how fucking long it takes and how mind-numbing it is. But it's not. The first encounter where you're doing totems, I think is a really good first encounter to learn the symbols, learn the names, learn rooms, and stuff like that. And to some extension, I would even consider it to be the easy version of Salvation Edge's first encounter, but we'll get to that. Moving on from Val was King's Fall, and like I said, remaster raids are going to get bonus points for being slightly harder if that encounter is harder. Now, the best encounter in King's Fall, this is probably the most debatable. Oryx, goated encounter, personal opinion. Daughters, I think, is a great encounter. Golgoroth, also pretty good encounter, even though it's very easy. But my pick, personally, is War Priest as the best encounter. And the main reason why is because you get 4 damage phases, you don't get unlimited. And some of the other encounters, you do get unlimited. And War Priest also, it's not common to just blow past War Priest where, you know, it takes you only 1 damage phase. I don't even know if it's possible to do 1 damage phase, but I know on average you get it done in 2 or 3, almost requiring all 3 totems, or I guess crystals or whatever that's called. But I think everyone needing to do something from, you know, you have the people on plates that are killing ads, and then you have people reading. Some people have this versatility thing, or part of the reason why I like this encounter is because of some of the versatility you can do, where either the plate person kills knight or the defender kills knight. Most of the time it's the plate person kills knight, but I have been in teams where the defenders will kill knight. So, you know, everyone gets a role at some point, on average, I'd say. And if you are doing this encounter, I think it's just a fun encounter to do. Really good boss fight. War Priest, you know, shooting axiom darts from time to time, and having those little hobgoblin things that he shoots at you. It's also kind of annoying that you gotta watch out for sometimes, him also being a boomer knight. So you constantly have the pressure of a boss, which I think is always good to have, while him not being able to just randomly one-shot you or something. You know, you're not babysitting a boss, but the boss is, to some extent, babysitting you. And then you need people to step on specific plates, so it definitely requires communication. Again, there's ways you can kind of get around communication with some of these encounters, but I think for the most part, you're calling out, you know, right step on, left step on, middle step on, sort of thing. There's punishments for fucking up the order, which I actually think is a adequate punishment for fucking up the order if you made the wrong call out or if someone stepped on too early and it causes a wipe. I think that's fair. And on top of all that, extending the timer requires people to be paying attention to timers. There's a lot of things going on, and I think it's the perfect amount of things going on. It's just such a good feeling encounter to play through when everyone's working together properly. And it's decently challenging, typically requiring 2 or 3 damage phases, while also only having a max of 4. To be honest, it almost feels like a final encounter, but it's the second encounter. And that's kind of why King's Fall is so special to me, personally. It just, every encounter feels like it could be the final. And that's partially why I enjoy War Priest. The worst encounter is the first encounter, and this is a hard one for me, personally. And by first encounter, I do mean totems. I don't mean the first section where you're dunking the ball. If that counted as an encounter, actually, does that count as an encounter, now that I'm thinking about it? Because don't you get a chest at the end? Now, I don't remember if that chest gives you something you've previously acquired, though. That's the thing. Ooh, that is the question, now that I'm thinking about it. I didn't think about that before making this list. Fuck. I'm not gonna count the first encounter as an encounter, because it's just ball trading. Maybe it is considered an encounter, I don't remember. I'll just be honest, I don't remember. But I don't consider it an encounter, and even then, I still think totems is gonna be ranked slightly lower, only because the balancing of the encounter is very odd. So the left side is way easier than the right side, having less ads, but also the left side doesn't get the ability to get enough points, or even close to the amount of points that the right side does, you know? So if you have any good players on the right side, and you're kind of punished for putting good players on the left side, because they won't physically be able to even match the points of the people on the right side. And then you can also get away with having 2 people ad clear and then just doing 2-man strat. That is kind of a common strat I see. There's no boss fight, and there's kind of just lazy unstoppables placed in the encounters, to be honest with you. I believe one shows up halfway, or maybe it's 30% or something, through the filling of the encounter. But overall, I just think it's mediocre, and the totems don't really prepare you that well for the future encounters. You're not going to be trading the immune aura at all. You're just going to be stealing it off a knight in the future encounters. So there's not really any need to be practicing that. The stacks that you get, the tithe that you get, I think are a cool reference to the fact that, you know, the hive require tithing. But you don't get those stacks in any other encounter either. So all the things you learn in the encounter aren't really used for anything else, like, at all. It has its standalone mechanics, and I guess you could argue that makes it more unique, and that's why it's better than the technical first encounter where you're trading balls. But in my personal opinion, I just find it to be boring, and I typically am watching a video while doing the encounter because it's very just, you know, every 20 seconds you're swapping with someone, and that's literally it. You're never really in danger unless no one's running unstoppable, but even then there's enough shit in the game to make it pretty easy to just, you know, what is it called, suspend enemies, which I believe triggers unstoppable. So it is what it is. I think I guess it's the second encounter, totems. Yeah, it's just the worst encounter. It's hard for me to pick, to be honest, other than those first 2. War Priest is a goated encounter. I thought for a second I was going to pick Golgroth just because of how easy Golgroth is, and because Golgroth now is much easier than it was in D1. I believe D1, the totem would charge or gain charges by deaths. I believe. Was it by deaths? Yeah, I think it was by deaths, or it was something else that charged it. I can't remember. But it was always like I remember at least wiping to the totem in D1. And D2 could just be the modernization, whatever, but I've never wiped to the totem once. I've ran the raid probably 30 plus times, or at least that encounter 30 plus times, and I've never wiped to the totem once. So I just think that's another encounter where the mechanics aren't really being used, and that's why it's not my number 1, nor it is the worst, because it does have a boss. It is fun. You have to pay attention with someone getting a debuff, and if that person's not paying attention, even though I don't know how you can't notice your screen turning green and being corroded, but hey, you know, some people are just blind, I guess. But yeah, those are my picks. Hard one for me to pick in King's Fall, but yeah, those are my picks for King's Fall, best and worst. Moving on, we have Root of Nightmares. Root of Nightmares, I think is, you know, I don't think it's a secret that it's one of the easiest, and I don't think it's going to be a secret for my best and worst here. My best encounter is Planetarium, or Planets, however you want to call it. Planetarium, I think, is the most balanced encounter of the whole raid. It's the only encounter in the raid that feels like a proper encounter, in my personal opinion, where you have 2 people ad clearing, 4 people doing mechanics. There's a very short time you get. I think it's underrated, actually, how short of a time you get when it comes to fucking up. So if you accidentally fuck up the planets, if there was a wrong callout made, more often than not, you're not able to actually get a second run through before the wipe mechanic happens. I think it's really cool. I think it's really cool shifting planets around. I think the light and dark parts are also really cool reading. You know, you kill a boss, you get that buff to then see which is which, and you have to make sure you get the final blow, which is something you see in a future raid, which is a little nod to the future raids. I think it's a really cool encounter. And then obviously you have the boss fight where you have to be listening to a shot caller, someone calling, you know, middle right or middle left, and then you do that. Damage is very versatile. You can kind of run whatever. Most people run rockets, grenade launchers, whatever. The worst encounter, in my opinion, is the first encounter. And I know some people might consider the first encounter, or sorry, the final encounter to be the worst encounter because of how easy it is, because it's the God of Pain, and you one-phase him. I completely understand that. But, personally, I just think the first encounter isn't even an encounter. If you're just mindlessly playing the game, killing ads, you probably won't struggle with the encounter at all. Mic's off, not really understanding mechanics, and having one person who did it before. Really, the only requirement for the first encounter is that you've had one person do the mechanic before, that's it. Other than that, you can ad clear, and then just listen if the guy's telling you to kill the Tormentor or not. There are sort of versatile ways to do this, you know. Killing Scions obviously just requires you to run up to them and punch them or shoot them in their bubble. And then obviously there's the champion that's lazily put in there. And then you have the obvious Tormentor. And if you kill the Tormentor too early, that's kind of your only concern. Other than that, you can kind of take your time, and it's just connect the dots. But, you know, using balls, it's just kind of boring. It's a terrible first encounter. Easiest way you can get a drop from a raid, in my opinion. And in my personal opinion, this is the easiest encounter in Bungie history. I don't think there's a single raid mechanic that's even close to how easy this is. There's a few contenders, I should say, but I think this is just by far the easiest. Moving on from Root of Nightmares, we have Crota's End. Now, I don't think it's a secret what the worst encounter is, but I think the best encounter might surprise you. My pick for the best encounter is the bridge, the second encounter. I think it did complete justice to the first game. First game, Crota was known to be a joke. It was known to be a strike. It was known to be soloable. Most raid teams, I even remember only running Crota. Well, not only, but mainly running Crota with 3 people. Or it was 4. It was me running Truth for my first time, and having 2 of my friends run Galley, and then the other person run the sword and down Crota. It was an embarrassment as a raid, I'll just be honest. It was terrible. Obviously the Ethernet meme, obviously how buggy it was with the Oversoul. We all remember this if you played D1. But the bridge was done complete justice. The bridge was literally an encounter that you used to be able to glitch across, and then you would have everyone die, and then you would sit there as a warlock, self-res, and then just wait for gatekeepers to spawn on your side, kill the sword bearers and all that shit. Yeah, brain dead, soloable, easy as fuck. In Destiny 2, you have to pass around a buff, and there's versatility with how you can pass around, making it a little easier and a little more you can plan for who gets what and where everyone's going, or you can just do chaos. Which, you know, obviously loses a little bit of points because of the chaos strategy, but I think the versatility makes up for it. And then you can have everything is also very what's the word? I don't want to say linear, but the objectives are very easy. Once you get a sword, you're meant to cross the bridge, which I think is like obvious. And then once you cross the bridge, you kill the blue guy, and then you get highlighted where to deposit your sword, you know? Even if you're a brand new player, I think it's very, very simple to understand. Oh, follow the gray marker, kill the blue guy, you know what I mean? And yeah, it's a little bit of a longer encounter, but I think it's an adequate length. I think it's a really cool idea getting, you know, Team 1 over, and then Team 1 stepping, Team 2 goes over, Team 1 stays, and then Team 1 would get off when Team 2 is ready to stand on, and then the bridge is formed from the other side, and then you basically get the other team over. Really cool idea, really cool concept, many ways to do the encounter. Some damage checks here and there with the amount of fucking champions that spawn. I think it might have the most champions in any encounter, to be honest with you. But yeah, I think it's a really cool concept, really cool idea. And then the worst encounter, I don't think is a secret. First encounter sucks ass. And I think it's a cool idea. And I think it's more complicated than it was in Destiny 1, which, yeah, you get perks for. But in comparison to the complexity and the level of challenge that, like, the Death Singer is and Crota is, I think the first encounter is by far the hardest for the simple reason of not being able to see shit on your screen. Most of the time you're not in lightning lamps, most of the time you're running chaos, so a lot of people aren't really communicating very well when they have chalice, when they're full, stuff like that. A lot of shit can go wrong very fast, and you only get a minute to balance the buffs between enlightenment and banking the chalice. Yeah, it's just a lot of shit going on. A lot of shit can go wrong, and often do in the raid. I doubt most people get through it without at least one person dying, at least from my experience. And when you get to the end, you get the reward of fighting unstoppable ogres, which is just not fun, and just very oddly placed. Now, it did do D1 justice, but at the end of the day, I don't think it makes it a good encounter just because, like, solemnly it did D1 justice, because D1 had Icebreaker and you could kind of just cheese the whole thing. But in D2, there's a lot of ways to do it, but I just think overall it's the worst. It's the worst of a bunch of good encounters, I will say. I don't think it's a bad encounter, I just think it's the worst in the raid. That's what I'll say about Crota's End. By far the first is the worst. Moving on, we have Salvation's Edge, the final encounter as of this list making. Salvation's Edge has some hit and misses from the community, but I personally think it's one of the best raids they've ever released. And the best encounter, in my opinion, this might be controversial, I think it's the second encounter. I think it's underrated as well. I think the first encounter is very, very good, with it teaching you how the mechanics work in the entire raid. I think the second encounter is very good at having a boss that you need to DPS, and you have to have mechanic by. So in a sense, you kind of get that babysitting. You also have 3 teams, and everyone needs to be paying attention to what's going on. Even the ad clear people are at very least needing to pick up buffs, needing to kill ads. So everyone's needing to pay attention at some point. Banking at the box also requires like a little bit of communication depending how fast you are. You're rewarded for being fast, because if you're the first team done, you can then go and help out the other teams. You can call out for other teams if mistakes are made, like people dying. There's a lot of things in this encounter that I think just make it so perfect. And for it being an encounter and not the final boss, I think it is the perfect example of what a boss encounter should be. Everyone doing a mechanic. Some are a little more complicated than the others. There's a lot of versatility with how you can do the mechanics. And yeah, a little bit of RNG related with the shapes and all that, but I think that's kind of needed in certain encounters. But yeah, damage also being very optional. I know everyone does swords. Personally, I tested with Still Hunt as my hunter, and I was out DPSing majority of people with swords, Wolfpack rounds. So you can definitely do well using precision weapons, even if Still Hunt gets nerfed by the 25% it's being nerfed by. Still probably viable. You're still probably going to out DPS if you're using it. Microcosm, also a decent use. And yeah, overall I think it's a really, really good encounter. I think it's as close to a perfect encounter as you can get as far as second encounters go. It's the best second encounter in Destiny of all time, and I'm going to stand by that. Moving on, we have the worst encounter, and I know some people might be, I know the first thing that comes to your mind, and it's the fourth encounter, where you have to fucking do the shapes and look at the wall and randomly get teleported and somebody dies, and then you get that blueberry who has no idea what's going on, picking up the ghost, and because he's high, he can't remember what ghost he picked up, and what numbers are being called out. You know, I've been there. And the fourth encounter is definitely tough as fuck. One of the hardest encounters ever made. But my pick for the worst encounter is actually the third, because I think the third is typically seen a little harder than what it actually is. I think there's an argument for the third being one of the easiest of all time. And here's why I think it's one of the easiest of all time. I think it's in the conversation. The third encounter, which if you don't know, that's the one where there's 3 senders and 3 receivers, and you basically run around, you get buffs, and you know, you have to deposit at the totems when everyone's ready. The reason why I think this is underratedly complicated, or sorry, why I think it's actually way easier than even people who think it's easier are saying it is because senders, there's no punishment for sending the buff at all. Maybe ads spawn, but the blockers don't spawn. So you can infinitely send the buff, and whenever the receivers are ready, they can close. And while there is communication needed with the shapes and everything like that, it's very simple. Very, very simple. You call out the shapes, you go to the side that has the shape, you pick up the shape, you bank. You only need, I think it's 6, it might be 6 to 9 buffs in order to cap out the timer. You get 4 minutes per room, almost 4, you get 3:30, I know, okay? Don't shit on me in the comments because I said 4 minutes, alright? You get 4 minutes, basically, for, each room. Very easy, and the hardest part is probably killing the Tormentor in each room, and after that, it becomes very easy. Now, from time to time, you might forget turret spawn, once all the blockers die, or I think it's tormentors die, and then you close all the pillars. But the only way you fuck up the encounter is by rushing ahead, and that's it. That's literally it. If you close your totem early, that might cause a wipe. If you honestly, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. If you jump the gun at closing the totem early, that's pretty much the only time you're going to cause a wipe, other than just being really slow at killing blockers. But Microcosm does well. A lot of the common raid loadouts do really, really well, so it makes it very easy. So yeah, that's my pick for the worst encounter. I think it's the third. I just think it's the easiest, and I think it's so easy that it doesn't belong in the raid. And I know, yes, the plates swap, you know. In the second room, right still goes to right, middle goes to left, left goes to right. I know. And in the final room, everyone goes to the right. There's very little cover. I get it, right? Third room, though, is easy as fuck. All the enemies are grouped together. Use any AoE super, and it pretty much will shred the Tormentors and the blockers. And then at that point, you literally just need to close once. Like, the first room is much easier than, or sorry, the third room is much easier than I think a lot of people. I think it's just early honeymoon phase pressure, where it's like, oh shit, I don't want to wipe. Oh, we're close to the end, like, let's really not fuck this up, let me make sure I'm doing everything perfectly. But it's really hard to fuck up the encounter unless you close wrong, or you just close too early. That's literally it. Other than that, it's really, like, no other ways I've wiped to it, personally. But maybe other people find it much harder. Maybe I've just been lucky with my LFG groups, you know? But that's personally where I stand with the raid. I think the second's the best. I think third's the worst. You know, I think fourth is good. I think it's almost too complicated, but I think it is good. I do like the fourth encounter, even though it is buggy. I've had many bugs where the people can't get out even though they have the key, and the outside team has done it perfectly. It's happened before. Also, I think Witness is a really cool encounter. You can do gamble method. I know a lot of people are doing it without mics now. So maybe in the future it'll be lowered, but for now, I do think that the third encounter is the worst, and I think the second encounter is almost perfect, and the best encounter in Salvation's Edge. But yeah, that's my personal list for the best and worst encounters in each raid in chronological order from release date. And yeah, thinking about still doing Destiny videos every Monday. So if you stick around, you know, you'll enjoy me ranting about something stupid in Destiny every Monday. And then I'm going to try to upload something every Friday. I'm newer to this YouTube stuff, that's why the gameplay and audio might not be great, but, you know, trying to become this YouTuber thing that people talk about, you know? So, yeah. Like always, I appreciate everyone who's been subscribing, commenting, liking the video. Really do appreciate. Spikes that dopamine every morning when I wake up. I have a boner and I just look and see that, you know, some random person's commented, and even if it's shit talk, it's, you know, nice to have banter back and forth. But, other than that, yeah, I just want to thank you guys for watching this video. If you made it to the end, you're one of the very few, and hope you have a good day.